My name is Divine Fu, based at the University of Cape Town, where I'm heading the Institute for Humanities in Africa. Amongst many things, we have a project we call the Future Hospitals Initiative, which is now really shifting to questions around ethics and care. And what we're really trying to understand is broad questions around ethics of artificial intelligence, but really locating it within the context of Africa, what it means to think about AI from an African perspective, and also how do we write questions around feminist work and feminist thinking in AI. And we're collaborating with many different partners across the world, but also across the continent, and one of which is Africa Center for Technology Studies, with whom we are doing a number of initiatives, one of those really focusing on ethics and AI in African perspective. Over the past 3 years, I think we have been deepening this question, and I will speak to one or two other aspects that we are really deepening, which is located within the work that we are doing right now, and also within the talk that we have today around decoloniality and also feminist AI. I like to always start by saying that I don't think I would call myself an expert on feminist work. I pretend to be a feminist. I like to say I'm a feminist ally, and also decolonial work, I think, is something that we have all come to embrace. I don't think I'm an expert on decoloniality, but I do work with decoloniality. And at the Institute, we take decoloniality and feminist thinking very seriously as frameworks around which we ground the thinking that we are doing. With decoloniality, we have centered what we call epistemic disobedience. Epistemic disobedience, which is a concept or a theoretical framework that we borrow from not feminists, from decolonial thinkers in South America, and also decolonial epistemic disobedience, which is really grounded in the work of Quinoa, and also Mignolo, Walter Mignolo, who is really one of the top thinkers on decolonial work, and epistemic disobedience, which is sometimes referred to as a zero-sum point, but we don't see it here as a zero-sum point. We take epistemic disobedience in the sense in which Walter Mignolo uses it, and he's using it based on the work of Samir Amin, and Samir Amin's concept of delinking. How do we delink, from this colonial, you could call it colonial, I want to call it colonial context. I don't want to necessarily say colonial master, but it's colonial master because the world of the colony, the world of colonization, is a world that is really grounded in a particular kind of patriarchy, which is a very dominant and oppressive kind of patriarchy, which is European patriarchy, which is white patriarchy, and which is dominant white patriarchy. So this disobedience, this epistemic disobedience, and this delinking, this attempt to find a way to cut our umbilical cord, from Europe, is something that we take seriously. And a question that we ask is really, what do we do after decolonization? What do we do after decoloniality? Decolonization and decoloniality, which are often used interchangeably, are really frameworks. On the one side, they are movements. On the other side, some people can call it frameworks. Others have criticized it as, criticized and critiqued it as a kind of movement without a body of a consistent or coherent body of theory. And I like to see it as an emancipatory a framework. And that is also why I think working with feminist work, which is also an emancipatory framework, which really tries to dislodge patriarchy and dislodge a system, patriarchy, which is really a system of male domination, a deep system of inequality, a deep system of discrimination, a deep system of what one would call dehumanization, is very similar, in my view, to decoloniality, because decoloniality in itself, as an emancipatory framework, is a movement for against dehumanization. So both frameworks I see, and both theoretical frameworks and movements I see as a theory of life. These are frameworks that allow us to really move into a space where we take human dignity more seriously. That's why I see feminist thinking and feminist work as a framework to have a more dignified life, a more dignified society. And I also see decolonial work or decoloniality as a kind of a framework which takes us to a place where human dignity is more important. We often seem to see these frameworks as provincializing in the sense that they are very narrow. So the critique of feminist work, especially from ordinary conservative or those who are deeply embedded in patriarchal thinking, is always that this is a thesis that is just a movement that's just about women, and that is a movement that is against men. It is similar when you take a decolonization movement and decoloniality movement. For decolonization that is thought of from this continent, especially given what people like Sabelo Ndlovu have done, is often seen as something that is more about positioning a particular time of phenotype, that it is a race-based framework, that it is a framework that tries to dislodge a whiteness by just being against whiteness. It's a framework that is just about taking care of Black people, but not just Black people, but Black African people. So the critiques and criticism of both are quite similar, and that is also why I think working with both is really important, because also of intersectionality as a framework, intersectionality which we borrow from feminist thinking, particularly from really a Black feminist thinking and writing. So those are really the two frameworks that we work with. So if you see the work that people like Amina Mama have done, asking really critical questions around what it is to think about the not just female self, but women in from an African perspective, also from Africa, and also from really a Black Africa. If you look at work, the work of people, feminists, African feminists such as Oyewomi Oyeronke, who is her most how I would say a seminal text or book that is most quoted is the book The Invention of Women, where she's really arguing that when one takes that category contextually, it manifests itself in different ways. So if you take really this long history and this long work that feminists, African feminists have done, what they've tried to do is also to show the multiple ways in which there are intersections, you know, in their oppression and intersections in their exclusion when you locate them within a global context. So the importance of having to have an analysis that is deeply examining the questions, examining the issues, and examining the problems that are particularly contextual for African women is really, really critical. So if you see whether it is the 1980s with the UN Decades for Women, you look at 1994 and 1994 and 1996 with 1994 with and 1995, I mean the conference in Cairo, the UN conference in Cairo, after that the Beijing conference and many other conferences, you would see that the critique that in the global feminist movement that particularly European white American and particularly elite feminist women have dominated and patronized other women and determine the agenda, determine the problem, if you and also determine the solution. If you look at the work of people like Chandra Mahanti, if you see the work also like post-colonial scholars in India, you know, and Brazil, many other parts of the world, you will see that this question has been really deepened, that it is important to have the solidarity globally, and because the patriarchal system is actually a global system, but the way it manifests itself in particular context is very specific. And that is why when one applies that lens in a particular context, it is really important in for context in the South to really understand the ways in which patriarchy operates and manifests itself in those local contexts, because in places where there is colonization, you have to deal with a patriarchy and then also deal with colonization, with the colony and with empire. In places, in other spaces, you know, you have to deal with race again, because race then comes in. So an intersectional framework is really key that looks at the intersections, you know, both of these domination and both of this oppression and also of this system. So that's really the one side where they intersect. I think that when one looks at examines the critique of decolonial work, decoloniality and decolonization, which is just the dislodging and the undoing of colonization, of the colonial project. And we have to understand the colonial project as a totalizing project. The colonial project, which, and quite often when we talk about the colonial project, we are really pointing today to a few places, particularly like in Asia, like in India, for example, and then an African continent where it's largely occurs, and then you have periods, you know, in South America, and then you also have like the USA, because we should not forget that the USA itself was a British a colony, you know, for a long time. So where it is really undoing this the project of undoing colonization. So, and colonization is, as I've said, is a totalizing a project, you know, and a totalizing project in the sense that it consumes all aspects of your life. So it is in the political realm in the sense of the control of people, you know, the administration of people, the sense in the sense that a colonial government implants itself to manage people. So that's a project. It's also economic, because in the economic sphere, because we should not forget that many colonial projects were first driven by exploitation and by trade. You know, finding the trade route to India to go and get spices, you know, to India, the entire British Empire project to get spices, and then cotton, you know, slavery itself driven by cotton, and then you have also harvesting cotton from the African continent, raw materials, other minerals, etc., etc., etc. So this project, you know, is totalizing, but it is cultural in the sense that it really redefines who you are, what you think, what you say, what you eat, you know. In this town in which I live, it is easier for me to eat pasta than to eat cornmeal, or it is easier for me to eat, pizza than to eat, for example, plantains or other stuff. But even some of these are things that are imported into the continent. But you see that it changes your taste, it changes your smell, it changes your desire, or it changes your language, it transforms you, how you think, how you smell, and that's why the African philosopher, or you call Congolese philosopher, Mudimbe, has argued that the way in which we deal with the colonial project, the way in which we deal with decolonization, we become again, is to find new smells, because he says that we are obsessed with the father smell, and the father smell is the patriarch's smell, a colonial smell, that we are finding it difficult, to find our own smell, but also to become comfortable with our own smell. Because Mudimbe argues that the colonial library dominates the way we live our lives, both in the colonial and the post-colonial context, and also today. And the colonial library is so present that it is very difficult to undo, because when we undo the colonial library, we are also undoing ourselves. And the colonial library for me is really data, it's all the information that exists about you that has been written, collected, and archived about you. And this is really important for artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence builds on data, it builds on information, it builds on the stuff that has been archived, stuff that has been collected, but collected with particular conceptual frameworks, collected with particular theoretical framework, with particular methodology, with particular techniques, with particular approaches that have predefined who you are as a particular kind of devalued being in a world of hierarchies. And it applies the same to women, because remember that for a long time, women were not considered as humans or human enough. Women were mainly treated as objects, just as properties, in the European context or in the Western context. It starts with the public and the private life, with women remaining in the domestic and men in the public. So when you look at the breadth of knowledge production itself, particularly writing and also this collating of data, it really is born out of a place where it's dominated by men, controlled by men, thoughtful by men. So what really operates in you could call it the patriarchal library, all of this information that operates and exists about a society and about who you are, about women. So when you enter a space, it is something that, like I was saying to colleagues last week, it is a kind of hidden curriculum. It exists, you take it for granted. So it already exists and operates, and your very existence itself embodies it. So this is really important. So when we take this then to the artificial intelligence context, or one of the arguments I've made is the fact that we need to start by looking at the birth of modern technology, like from the industrialization era to the post-Enlightenment context. So when we look at all of these periods, what has happened is that the modern subject, the modern person, has been defined along a particular kind of industrial subject that is determined by the Cartesian, what you call Cartesian logic, and Cartesian logic or Cartesian subjectivity, which is a modern person is a Cartesian person, and the Cartesian person is one who is whole, one who is stable, one who is predictable, one that you can determine. And if you look at how modern technology and artificial intelligence operates, it's artificial intelligence which is really founded also on functional relationships and on what you call functional mathematics, is about functional relationships, and it's about sequencing, particular kinds of sequencing, which is a kind of a logic. A plus B is equals to C and leads to this. So when something is not predictable, which is what we are seeing now with all these talks about interoperability and also questions around the black hole, etc., etc., we get confused, and And I say that artificial intelligence is framed by what we call and what one can define as the thesis for customary surprises. The thesis of customary surprises, what I try to do with the thesis of customary surprises is to explain it through birthdays. You know, my son, every time I pick up my son, and I have to give him a gift when I pick him up from school, you know, and he always knows the gift I should give him. So if I come back and I don't give him sweets and I give him corn, he's going to start crying because, you know, he will ask, where is my surprise? So even though he says it's a surprise, it's something that he expects. And in European society, at least from my experience, when you are buying something for somebody's birthday, you spend a lot of time doing research so that you can give that person a gift that the person would like. So you cannot give that person a gift that is a surprise. So even though it's a surprise, it's not a surprise. It has to be very predictable. And I say that this is really the key, one of the key problems that we have with artificial intelligence, because it embodies this particular logic, both in how it is developed, in who is developing it, and who it targets, you know. But that when you take that technology and you insert it in another society where the logic is very different, and I think many of our either African or Southern societies are spaces where that logic applies very differently, where unpredictability is an aspect of everyday life, where the subject is very convivial, then it requires that we begin to think very, very differently. And this is the same logic that we apply against, you know, to a feminist thinking, that when you then apply another logic, you begin to dislodge, you begin to see technology as deeply patriarchal. You begin to see technology as founded on concepts and ideas developed with patriarchy in mind. Then it begins to make you think again, because this technology, these ideas, this research are really founded on patriarchy. They're founded on a colonial project mindset, on an ableist mindset, you know, on really deeply exclusive framework. So even when you do debiasing using particular technologies, what you're doing is reinforcing the system in a way. So the only way you can resolve it is to resolve it with technology that comes from that same place. And that is also what I've called really the original sin of tech, which is the fact that it is founded both from a colonial framework, but also from a dark corner, which is masculinity. This dark corner is when you see the people who champion this technology were really mainly men. You would also see that they're coming from some of these dark spaces. Dark spaces, not that they are dark, but you know, it comes out of garages, it comes out of dark corners, it comes out of particular groups of people who have been deeply embedded in particular places as nerds. And therefore, I argue that it is already misogynist and it's already colonial in a sense. So we have to start rethinking how we do data, how we collect data, how we constitute places, how we organize. So we need a totalizing project to be able to resolve the challenges that confront us in this technology. I think I've spoken a lot, Michelle.
I think every single bit of that was brilliant and fascinating. I think that there's so much to take away from this. I want to pick on two things that you mentioned. So the idea of totalizing as a colonial project, but it can also be seen in parallel as a project that's now happening with AI. So to not just consume and take over aspects and facets of your life, but also in a decision-making capacity. So what you envision as your likes and dislikes are driven by algorithms, are driven by what's boosted by all of these different networks. So I think what I would want to ask you is, when we talk about how to debias, how to decolonize, decoloniality, what we're really asking is, what are we going back to, or what are we going towards? Because prior to colonialism, there were still very patriarchal systems that were in place in any context that you can think of. So our aim in being able to achieve decoloniality is really trying to get to this new sort of modern vision of what we consider to be anti-authoritarian or anti-imperial. And in your view, how do we break apart those systems, being part of them? And how do we get to a point where even within ourselves, we have to de-bias ourselves? So where do we start?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that this is a question that we all have to ask and that we all have to respond to. There is no magic bullet that will offer you an immediate solution to it. I like Mignolo's argument that decoloniality is a long-term project. It's a never-ending project. It's a continuous project. So it's not a temporary intervention, because a temporary intervention would mean that you have given it a small vaccination and then it has been resolved. So it's actually a long-term project. It's a continuous project. It's a never-ending project. And I like an argument from Samir Amin, where he's talking about the fact that when one is delinking, it does not mean a radical rupture. You know, it's not a fully radical rupture. So a total break from what already exists. The first is, I think, acknowledging a challenge, I think, is the first step to a solution. I like the way in which I think science works, because science is very reductionist. You know, it takes something, it reduces it to the basic minimum, and then focuses on trying to analyze and understand what it does. Last week with the colleagues at the ACTS, we were trying to explore. I asked them to think, if you were to think about the work that you're doing, whether you are doing spatial mapping, you know, if you are doing whether it's coding, regression, or whatever whatever you're doing, would you say that there is a hidden curriculum that you have ignored? Would you be able to reflect and think about some of the silences, the presences that you think are important for you to reflect on it with respect to colonization, or with respect to feminist work, or to oppression, or to exclusion, or to ableism, you know, and all of the other movements, racism, you know. What do you think you have left out, you know? And it's funny because usually everyone focuses on the work they are doing, you see. But if I started, for example, by just looking at this environment in which I'm sitting, this chair was designed for a particular body, you know. I take it for granted that the chair on which I'm sitting is actually designed for a particular body, you know, and that this table is actually defined for a particular body. And here I'm just talking about those who are able in a particular way. So if you are a man, for example, and you sit here, it's an easy thing for you on this table. And I could say the same of this computer, you know, and how it's designed. So these are silences that are so present, but at the same time that we take for granted. But for us to think about this, for us to take this into consideration, it requires us first to be very patient. And patience is what we don't have, because remember, we are working with a field in which one of our main projects is efficiency. So speed is really important. But when you read what Gebru and colleagues are raising about the ways in which the technology that we take, that we celebrate, can itself have this hidden curriculum, it means that we have to push ourselves to ask questions so that we can begin to dislodge some of these both colonial, patriarchal, ableist, and other, the intersectionality of problems that require us to move to a more dignified space. But it needs patience, and it requires us to stop and pause and ask lots of questions about us, about our environment, and then before the technology that we are working with.
I think that at least elucidates on what we need to do, where we need to begin. And I think especially when we're trying to figure out how and when and where to deconstruct power, I think people tend to forget that it does start with yourself. There's so many aspects of patriarchal thinking, feeling, doing, being. Even if you say, well, I am the most ardent feminist, and you can find yourself in situations where you don't practice it, you don't practice that feminism, and it's not by design, it's purely because that's the conditioning. We have a question from Titilola Olojede. She asks, how much decoloniality can we achieve or is desired, given that virtually all aspects of our lives, our springboards, are all tainted with decoloniality? And the second one is decoloniality not utopic?
I will start with the second one. No, it's not utopic. And I think that we have to expect critique and criticism. That's important. I think critique and criticism are always important because they say science has a heuristic value. So it leads you to think more and to even ask and answer more questions. So we're going to have a lot of these questions. It's not utopic. This is the same critique of feminist work, that this is it thinks it's a totalizing a system. This is just going to be a project that's going to be against men. You forget that in the patriarchal system, there is a hierarchy. So while all men have benefits, you still have younger men, you have cadets, you have children, youth, and others who do not have the same kinds of privileges that elderly men will have, in particular contexts. So we are seeing across the continent what that challenge is causing, and also provoking. So I think we should expect that a project. It's not utopic. It's an ongoing process, and it's a continuous project. It's a lifetime project, but it's not utopic. But also because we have seen the challenges when particular groups of people and communities are excluded from being part of society. We have also seen how we exclude nature. We don't take cognizance of nature. All the talk about the Anthropocene now is also because we just thought nature was something that we should just batter. You should go out, burn trees. You should go out, just kill animals. You go out, just cut down grass and others. Now we're beginning to see that all of that talk and critique in the past that some people considered that was just utopia, that we can actually, we need to take it seriously, and that we can turn around. If people go green, for example, if people take a forest, for example, seriously, if there are lots of small things that we could do to change and transform that. So I don't think the decolonial project is utopic, because just like the feminist project, I think humanity benefits more when we live and consider everybody collectively, as people, and when we can take all anxieties, can take all challenges, into consideration. So that's for the second answer. The first is how much decoloniality we can achieve or is desired. That's why it's an ongoing process. We start from somewhere, we start on doing, and I think the first thing is consciousness. And there is extensive literature which actually shows these long-term projects of undoing. And I think it's a continuous project. The project also of knowledge, when we talk about decoloniality today, we are really talking about knowledge decolonization in particular, and that knowledge decolonization or knowledge decoloniality can lead to even broader questions. It's about how science is done. It's about what we take seriously as knowledge, what archives we take seriously, and what conceptual frameworks we take seriously. Like the Mozambican a scholar, a sociologist, Eliseo Mancamo, talks about the importance of finding conceptual vocabularies that make our experiences intelligible for every community. And he uses the example of risk, for example. That risk, when you take risk is understood differently in different spaces. And when you take the response to risk that we have, it pushes you to begin to think about concepts such as resilience. It pushes you to think about how we respond, for example, to COVID, So really finding conceptual vocabularies are quite, critical. Personhood is also different. Where I come from, a person who changes, from barefoot in the Cameroon, a grass field. So you're born one person, you become another person, then you go through different age groups, and when you die, you're someone else. But if you build me through a Cartesian logic, I am born one person, I grow up one person, I die the same person. My name was Divine Fu, and I'm going to live my entire life as Divine Fu. In my custom, in fact, my name has shifted. My name is now Abongnala. But, if I were to start writing Abongnala on the paper because I've become someone else, that's going to create all sorts of challenges. And this is what I mean by the unpredictability of particular kinds of being. And I think if we begin to invest deeply in really what it means to think about science, to deploy science in particular contexts, and what it means to deploy to localize science, not to provincialize it, but to really invest in looking for tools, techniques, and conceptual vocabularies that make experiences intelligible in particular contexts, but also see the way in which we can build a communal a science, which is like a global science that takes on board all others. Escobar talks about building a pluriversal world, a world in which many worlds are possible, a world in which many thoughts and many ideas are possible. And I think it's possible once one starts reflecting on this and investing on this scientifically, it is possible to begin to transfer this in the work that we're doing in artificial intelligence. What is data? How do we collect data? What do we count as data? What other alternatives do we have for data? What is knowledge? What do we count as knowledge? What other alternatives do we have? So what kinds of models do we build? Where else can we borrow this? I think we will be able to do that. It's a long-term project. It's a project not just for African people or people from the South or now post-colonial people, but it's a global project because it's a contribution to humanity.
Thank you so much for your response. I think from that, I have a question on the different stakeholders that are associated with this liberatory movement and their role. So there are attempts to include, firstly, for example, the CEOs, the people who run these companies themselves, and there are also attempts to involve government. So recently, as an example, there was a company, WorldCoin, which was operating in Kenya. And what they did was that they took the biometric data of thousands of people, and the reward for giving away your biometric data would be a certain amount of money, which is no small amount for most people. And there was the question of at what point does the government as a stakeholder step in? So I think because as different stakeholders can be agents of patriarchy and agents of coloniality, certainly there are ways in Africa, I think, that we've seen that those regimes can maintain that colonial mindset. And as technology is entering into hyperdrive, how do we engage with these different, not just the different parties themselves, but how do we engage with government? How do we engage with the stakeholders that are the perpetrators of this colonial mindset?
Yeah. Firstly, I think the concept of stakeholder is something that we need to rethink. Concept of stakeholder is something that we inherit. Mm-hmm. All these people with stakes, holding stakes around a bonfire. so that's already place to, if we did not think about stakeholder, what else would we deploy? How else would we think this idea, and what would it mean, you know, for the kinds of undoing that we want to do, and also for the kinds of things that we need to achieve. That's the tough work to do, and that's what we mean by finding conceptual vocabularies that make that experience intelligible. So it means asking really critical questions about the things that we take for granted, whether it's our language, whether it's how we think, how we imagine, you know, how we work. That is important, because if we don't do that, even when we work with stakeholders, what we are still doing is deepening, you know, these inequalities. But to speak to that, you know, my a friend and colleague and mentor, Francis Nyamdo, talks about conviviality as a framework. Conviviality, which is also a framework of inclusiveness, you know. I use the example of a virus, that when a virus attacks or infects a person, the virus and the host are codependent. So if the host kills the virus, they lose their life, isn't it? If the virus kills the host, they don't have any host, you know, to rely on. So there's a codependence relationship, and I think that's what Udimbe is talking about. And I think feminists have shown us that despite the different manifestations of patriarchy in their particular context, thinking about it as a global phenomenon and as a solidarity is really important. So that's why you see the feminist movement globally is able to connect, you know, working with intersectionality, you know, as a framework. And I think with decolonization, this is really key, important to build on the feminist movement and feminist thinking, you know, because I think there is a lot to offer, you know, already with the work that has been done. The colonial project is totalizing and ever present. The idea is not to, like I say, to do a complete rupture. You know, like the Iranian scholar Dabashi would argue, and also Mignolo. The idea is to borrow, see what benefits, what not benefits, but allow room for different conceptual frameworks, different theoretical frameworks, different methodologies, different techniques to breathe. Because if you focus either just on ones that are misogynist or patriarchal, or ones that are either colonial in a particular way or ableist in a particular way, what you do is already, even in undoing it, you're still creating a particular a kind of a particular world. The idea, the concept of government, the concept of leadership, the concept of transparency, the concept, there are lots of things that need to shift, that we need to borrow from others, but we need to be open to do that. And that's the difficult part, that we are not always too open. Our response to it is first defense. So the same way we respond to feminist work is the same way we respond to decolonial work, you know, that this is something trying to take us away, and therefore we can't. The men say this project is very bad because this project is trying to dislodge us men, and it's a project against men. You know, you have others who argue that this decolonial project is just a project that is against whiteness, it's against white people. But we should not, I don't think that's a useful way, you know, to approach it. This is a project, these are projects about human dignity. These are projects about making life livable. These are projects about ensuring that there is cohabitation, collective cohabitation. These are projects, if you're working in the technology sector and the AI sector, these are actually projects which enhance the technology that you're using and producing and creating. It actually puts you at the forefront, and it pushes you to create cutting-edge technology. And I think in the future, those who are invested in doing artificial intelligence work that takes on board decoloniality, takes on board feminist thinking, takes on board disability, actually, I think they are going to be at the forefront of cutting-edge research than others who will be considered very exclusive. You know?